Stop getting caught up so much in the education that you have. Where a lot of us are focused on getting a certain type of education or getting up to management, hitting that C-suite. And let's think about business as a whole. I think that one epiphany I had was understanding what a business is and how it works and how different business areas mesh together. I was mentioning before that we're here for the same end result, and that's not only just for procurement, it's for a business as a whole. We are here for the same outcomes, and it may look a little bit different because we all work in different business areas, but we need to understand what it is we're here for.
Thanks so much for joining another edition of The Never-Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement for companies running SAP. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Liana Maharaj. And Liana is a guide to seizing opportunities and has done that through her entire life. It's what got her into procurement. And the principles of good procurement, especially for public sector. So, if you are just tuning in, I know public sector it's an organization that collects taxes and spends money. And so this is one of the most fundamental pillars of things that public sector needs to do well. Liana, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Sean, and hi, everybody, and thanks so much for having me on the show. I am extremely excited to talk about my experience and to encourage those working in the world of procurement or thinking about getting into procurement. I'm excited to let you know about all the opportunities that exist in there. And to not sugarcoat it a little bit when I say there are some tough days, but everything will work itself out at the end of the day.
That's beautiful. Yeah, we all need to become the person to deal with the problems that we encounter in our lives. It's the growth comes on the other side of some discomfort, and that is a beautiful way of looking at life. It's part of the never-ending climb. So,
Right.
Liana, when we were talking earlier, one of the things that really struck me is how this openness for opportunities. And when somebody says, hey, would you like to, or we could use a hand with, you've just brought this beautiful attitude of, yeah, let's try it. Put me in. How has that shaped your career? And I know, somewhat surprisingly, coming from what you thought you were going to do to where you are today.
I know it did procurement, as I was saying, was the career that I never thought I would get into. I think one of the first times I heard the word procurement was when I had an opportunity handed to me to backfill for a purchasing clerk who was on medical leave. But it is, I do think I have a go-getter attitude. I hear something and I'm like, that's interesting. Let's see what we can do with it. And I think that's the gist of procurement in general. So public sector needs to have that mindset. Let's see what we can do with it. I think we're so bogged down by public sector processes and ensuring we have the right optics for taxpayers and otherwise that we miss opportunities. And it's interesting, even though I don't work in the public sector anymore, I took that exact same attitude, flipped the script on its head, and now in my own consultancy, I heavily focus on working with the public sector still because it's that same attitude that had me going, what can I do from the private side of things to help enhance what the public sector does? It's such critical services that are provided, and it goes without saying that the money is very valuable. We need to translate that into sound procurement opportunities and delivering the right services that everybody needs.
I love the focus on creating the right outcomes. And I think it's so easy to fall into the trap of checking the box or staying purely in the process. And when you're stuck so far in the check boxes in the process, it's easy to lose sight of the forest for the trees and what problem are you solving and what needs to be true to fundamentally solve with a good outcome and a fair process the thing that needs to be procured. Because if you're collecting taxes and spending money to go and serve your customers, citizens, constituents, then that is a monumentally important task. So, if you had a few moments to offer some advice for procurement pros in the public sector, what's on your heart that you know would serve them?
I'd say stop getting caught up so much in the education that you have. For a lot of us are focused on getting a certain type of education or getting up to management, hitting that C-suite. And let's think about business as a whole. I think that one epiphany I had uh, was understanding what a business is and how it works and how different business areas mesh together. I was mentioning before that we're here for the same end result, and that's not only just for procurement, it's for a business as a whole. We are here for the same outcomes, and it may look a little bit different because we all work in different business areas, but we need to understand what it is we're here for. So I find that a lot of us get into procurement without understanding how a business works and the type of governance that is at play, and particularly when you're working in the public sector or even somewhere that has like a board of directors, for example. So we need to understand different business structures and how key decisions are made from the top down. Once you understand that, it's like a puzzle being put together. You start to see how all the pieces get put together and how it flows and how it's interconnected. That will help you to understand the overall strategic vision, your objectives. You start to understand how roadmaps are put into play, and you understand how key decision makers work together to achieve that common goal. So my advice to procurement professionals is start getting clear on what a business is. And even from there, it will help you understand what aspect of supply chain you would like to work in. So some people go in thinking that they want to do logistics. I was speaking to somebody the other day. They were like, yeah, I have a master's in logistics. And in speaking to him, it turns out he's actually really good at vendor performance management. And that's probably a focus he should be taking on.
I think getting so caught up in a piece of paper or a few letters is not the focus that is genuinely going to move things forward. In the world of software, sometimes companies get so excited about how much money they raised instead of how much value they created or how many customers they helped. And I think similarly with education, there's an opportunity to stay focused on what makes the difference. Because when you show up to the world and you create value for the world finds ways to come back and set that square from a karmic perspective for you too. I think one of the ways that we do that in creating value is supporting and reinforcing a flow of communication. And this is one of those things that from a pure check the box perspective can sometimes get in the way, especially in public sector. Anybody that, maybe in the last little while was following some things that happened in the federal government, there's probably a department or two that were suddenly not talking to anybody because of the way a few things have gone. And if you're not talking to anybody, then you are stuck in an echo chamber of your own four walls. And that's a spectacularly dangerous place to get. So that sense of how important communication is and how in procurement, you are enabling a flow of communication, of ideas, of requirements, of constraints, of maybe budgets, maybe, purchasing thresholds. And how do you how do you see that conduit? And what advice do you have for folks around facilitating great communication? What does good look like in public sector?
Oh, such a good question, such a loaded topic. The fact of the matter is that you have to communicate. That's the long and short of it. There's lots of examples out there on how important it is to communicate. Just as an aside, if for any of my Caribbean community that's looking out here, we're going to liken this to something like the TSTT um, crisis that happened, and how it's a perfect example of how people didn't speak to one another.
Mm.
So yeah,
Never a
we
recipe for something good, right?
yeah, and this was at the C-suite level. So communication is so key because information never stops. Information is always flowing, whether or not it's disclosed or not. I oftentimes say that the less you hear, the more is going on in the background. But you have to understand who your audience is. But I've boiled it down to a very simple recipe. You have to always know what your critical factors are. What are you observing? What are the knowns? Giving options based on those knowns and providing a recommendation if you can. No matter what level you're at, you're going to find out that you're going to find that everybody requires the same boilerplate set of information. And what is important to note as well is that when you communicate, don't make things up because it's going to come back to bite you.
100%.
But you're also potentially proposing something that is not feasible to begin with. So don't make things up. You must stick to the facts always. The facts don't have to be detailed. They just have to be simply factual.
So simple. So
Well,
simple.
yeah.
I think the other thing that I would add to that is framing those facts effectively, right? The way they are presented is so important to making sure that they land in context, because I think a fact completely out of context is also potentially very harmful. And so bringing that context, this is what I think makes it so difficult to share information sometimes. Even just as an example, the decision community or the decision committee needs an extra month because there was a personal event. Somebody had something going on in their family, and guess what? That's going to impact the timeline. How much of that can you share? Well, if it's presented as, well, the committee needs another month, or, an important member of the community had an emergency and we need another month. Those two things elicit a very different response from the people participating in a response. One of them is, oh God, here they're just taking their sweet time. And another one is, oh my God, there's a human story. I'm so sorry to hear that. Yes, of course. And I think that contrast is something that, when wielded well, can create a vastly different experience for both the internal community participating in a sourcing event and the vendors that are participating in it. And I think that sense of communication and the flow of communication without letting anything offside or without letting anything personal out, I think that there's an opportunity to really keep a flow of communication going, even during a process, because it's not that you're not allowed to talk. You just have to be cautious of what you talk about. And as long as we're true in the way that we do that, I'm confident that anybody watching this would be able to come away with it with, yeah, you're right. I didn't have to just say I'm not allowed to talk to you, because that's, again, unhelpful. So I love the way that you're emphasizing the importance of communication. I think the next one that goes with that is a sense of speed and pace. And there's a stereotype around public sector procurement and the speed or pace that it may or may not move at. What advice would you have for somebody in procurement, or maybe somebody working internally with procurement, to go and help things move more effectively through the required process?
Believe it or not, you need to think quick on your feet and be able to make decisions quickly. Oftentimes, that's also done with very little information. So, to prove your point about communication and the flows, but not really being able to disclose a lot of things. So that's the beauty of being agile. And if we had $1 for every time we heard agile on a daily basis, well, we could probably,
We,
retire
we,
that, right?
yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. If the agility was where we needed it to be, we'd all be yoga pros.
Yeah. So it's not just having like agile project management methodologies or agile in every industry but procurement, but actually there's a fair amount of agility that is required in procurement as well as the procurement process. So in the public sector, if we're using that as an example, once you hit post to the market, you don't know what's happening from there. You can speculate, but it's just you're sending it out into the universe and you don't know what's coming back. It could come back highly political. People could start trying to poke holes. You can get 300 questions. You just have no idea. But procurement professionals need to be able to think on their feet and ensure that not only they're following the process, but they have to also be able to think of things that they can do in parallel. What are things that are not going to circumvent the process, but will still allow you to say, okay, we're advancing it along? Sometimes the nature of the beast is that you've done all you can, But being agile is also being able to keep stock of, like I said before, all the knowns and just being prepared as much as possible for the next steps. I found as a procurement professional, you have to think several steps ahead of your clients, and you have to think a lot like a supplier when procurements are on the market. There's enough examples out there, not only from projects you've run, but also historically in your procurement department, of same or similar procurements where certain things have happened. You need to take a fulsome inventory of other procurements and things that have happened along the way.
Fantastic. Leanna, you've got such a tremendous career and experience, and I know that you help organizations level up their procurement. What's the best way for somebody watching the show to reach out to you?
You can get me at my website, www.leanamaharaj.com. If you're on LinkedIn, you can shoot me a DM. If you want to email me, leanna@leannamaharaj.com. I'm pretty accessible. I'd like to give you the reassurance that if you reach out to me, I'm more than willing to have a conversation with you.
Fantastic. That's amazing. Leanna, thank you so much for joining. And for everybody watching, this has been another edition of The Never Ending Climb for stronger supply chain and procurement for companies running SAP. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.